everybody. Buenas tardes. An honor to be here with Maziar Minovi, CEO of Eurasia Group. I'm looking forward to this conversation. Maziar, you publish every year a list of political risk, geopolitical risk, and other type of risk. Can you tell us what's your take right now, or what are the main risks that we should be aware of?
Sure. First of all, thank you. I want to thank the organizers for inviting me here, and thank you for arranging our session right after the one on entertainment. Obviously a serious and multi-billion-dollar business, but I hope you're all warm and fuzzy thinking about Inside Out 2, 007, Jodie Foster, because what I have to say is not going to be warm and fuzzy. So for those of you not familiar with Eurasia Group, it's the largest geopolitical advisory in the world. We are the people corporations and investors globally come to when Iranians lob 180 missiles onto Israel, and we're trying to figure out what happens next. We're the people folks come to try to understand not just who's going to win the election in the US, but what will they do next. So it's been a full employment type of period the last year or two for us, and look forward to having a deep conversation about issues on your mind.
Thank you. The US-China relationships and the implications for those countries, but for the world as a whole, and particularly to North America and Mexico. What's your vision on the coming months and the potential implications of the US election on that front?
Sure. I was actually very interested to hear the panel 2 sessions back where they touched on this issue, I thought in very thoughtful ways. So I think the message that you should take away from today is that the direction of travel on US and China confrontation is clear. The tensions between the two countries is only going to increase, and it doesn't matter whether there's Trump wins or Harris wins. The only difference that makes is how fast we get to a world that's unfortunately more fragmented and less optimal than we're in today. So this rivalry has multiple different strands to it, and the different parties in the US emphasize different parts of it. There is within Washington, nothing really at this point unites the Democrats and the Republican, except for the fact that they all agree that China has been unfairly competing with the US, unfairly subsidizing its industries, and it's out to change the role of the US as the predominant economic power. And for a country that fundamentally is not a democracy, that combination of factors really causes a lot of folks, everyone in DC, to be concerned. Now, our job is not to have judgments about what's right or wrong, but our job is to understand where the world is headed, and that's where we're headed. So when you think about the next few months, the Chinese are sitting there in Beijing asking the same questions. When we go to Beijing and talk to people in the Politburo, they are very concerned. They used to think that they were hoping President Trump would win because they could do a deal with him and reduce the temperature. They no longer think that. And I think they're smart in that assessment, because the biggest single immediate risk that corporations and investors globally are not internalizing is if we have a US election which is won by the Republicans, the next Trump administration, in its approach to trade policy and immigration, is going to be far more aggressive and assertive, much faster than before. And at the beginning, in the first year, the target is squarely going to be on the back of China. So we should see very quickly actions, not just words, but actions that ratchet up the pressure on China, especially tariffs against Chinese goods of all sorts. And we think that this pressure will continue throughout the administration. And unfortunately, Mexico is going to suffer some of the drag from this conflict.
How should companies prepare for different scenarios once they learn these risks, in addition to hiring Eurasia?
It really depends where you are and what your industry is. In a Trump win scenario in the US, the focus will be on reducing trade deficits against individual countries that run those with the US, China being the biggest, but not the only one. Germany, Japan, South Korea are all in the crosshairs. So if you are an industry that is benefiting from the deeper integration between these regions, you need to be prepared now and planning. I often tell our corporate clients who are very curious about the outcome of the election, they want to hear all about what happens under each scenario. But when I ask them, so what are you doing about it? Whether I ask that question in the US, in Europe, or Asia, or elsewhere in the Americas, the answer is almost every time nothing. Because they don't expect there to be much action and much more. They think it's going to be much more words the first 2 years. There's a variety of reasons we don't think that. But if you're a company that benefits from relationship with those countries, you need to be prepared now, just as you would if there was any other outcome that you thought has a 50% chance of happening that was going to seriously impact your business. Just because it's politics and policy doesn't mean you do nothing and wait for it to happen, then react. Of course, there's a whole group of companies that will benefit from raising of the walls around the US and the North American area. And those countries, those companies should be preparing to reap the benefits. I think a lot of the companies in Mexico fall in that category, but it's not those benefits are not going to be handed to Mexican companies. You have to do a lot of preparation, both at the company level and at the government level, to make sure that you're able to have a smooth transition and be the beneficiaries of being inside the tent of this North American integration area that the panel 2 panels ago was speaking so eloquently about.
Enrique and Emilio started the event talking about the need to have a North American narrative and a shared vision of prosperity. Is there a North American narrative, and if not, how can it be created, and what will be your take on how to integrate better the region?
There is definitely a North American narrative, and obviously there is a lot of deep history and more recent economic integration that has created interest groups, as you know, represented here. We had a summit in Canada in April, bringing together US and Canadian companies around similar issues. And you could see the constituency for this North American economic zone's deepening and growth. But the reality is that that's not enough. The states, provinces, and corporations that benefit from integration are a powerful actor in what's about to come, but populations and the political systems are equally, if not more powerful. And the reality is that over the last 15 years, we've seen a massive move towards a nativism, polarization that is compelling the body politic, not just in the US, but in a lot of advanced economies, to look inward, to retrench from the world. They are looking for reasons why the lower middle class and the middle class are no longer feeling as relatively well off as they used to. And there's plenty of politicians on the left and the right that are telling them, it's not your fault, it's the fault of them. The them is oftentimes China, but it's many times migrants coming up from Mexico, crime being exported from South America and this region. So that narrative is very strong, and it's going to get stronger. So these forces that for integration really need to pay attention. And I say that because there's many other countries in the world who want to be part of the economic zone that will happen around the US and much of Europe once this economic bifurcation from China starts growing, as we think it will, no matter who wins. If you're a company in India, if you're companies in a variety of European countries, Australia, Japan, South Korea, they all have something to say about why they want to be security and economic partners with the US, with the West, and they are starting to do more and more to get ready for it. I'll give you an example, Canada. The Canadians understand what's happening, the government there, and this turn towards inward looking policies in the US. So they have started to align their policy on tariffs for high technology, on investments from the Chinese, very much in ways that are quite similar to the US. Not all the way there, but they're moving in that direction. Several European countries we see start doing that on EVs. And that's, if you're a pure economic agent, a private company, a trained economist at one of your wonderful universities, you would say that's a horrible outcome for the world. But the reality is that that's where we're headed, and those countries are starting to position for it.
Following up on these synchronizations of policies between the US and Canada in terms of trade with China, should Mexico be doing something similar, and should we be thinking about creating institutions that allowed for better synchronization of North American policy?
Yeah, as I started out saying, I deal in the world of what will happen as opposed to what should happen. So obviously the answer to that question is yes. And it's not only necessary if a Trump administration comes to power. I'll tell you the most detailed conversation I recently had about how to amend USMCA was with a very senior official within the Biden administration, an expert on trade policy that's very likely going to be one of the key actors in any Harris administration, who spent an hour talking to me about, in detail, the ways that the rules of origin components of USMCA can be used, the current rules, and in her words, abused, to bring in lots of goods and products, especially from China, but also from other countries. And this is a Democratic senior official. So this problem is coming. And if you think about it, if you think a Harris administration is going to be more sympathetic, I wouldn't disagree. I would say they would be less aggressive because their view on immigration and their view on trade with China is less intense. But don't forget, Vice President Harris is a lawyer. She was an attorney general in California. Her view of the world, her emerging foreign policy, is centered around the rule of law. And that's going to be one of the differences with the Biden administration, which was more focused on the promotion of democracy globally. So you have an administration coming to power focused on the rule of law. It's not the best look to, at the same time, be shifting Mexico's judicial system to something where the executive has much more power, or independent agencies and authorities, their power being weakened. I think that combination is going to cause friction, even with the Harris government. And yes, it will be great to prepare for that. I don't see any sign of it.
The name of our panel, the organizers name it Feel the Power. Who holds power in North America, and how are the power dynamics changing?
That in an economy and a country as diverse and as large as the U.S., that's not an easy one-word answer. I will say that a lot of the traditional sources of power, the big industrialists, the think tanks they had created to support their views, and the politicians that they supported, especially in favor of liberal economic policies that were typically championed by the Republicans, many of them have found that their power is less than they expected. As this inward turn in U.S. body politics has been captured by politicians like Trump, President Trump, J.D. Vance, and others. So there is a shift, changing of the guard happening on both sides of the spectrum, and those shifts are never easy, and they create a lot of uncertainty. And I think from a U.S. perspective, what that's going to mean is paralysis. It's going to be both an inability to make big decisions, but also a lot of zigzagging in policymaking, the likes of which we haven't been used to in the last generation or two.
You mentioned this morning something that caught my attention, that very senior officials in very prominent governments sometimes don't have enough time to think long-term, and they are 98% focused on the current crisis. If we try to think a little bit long-term for North America, what should be the agenda thinking towards 2040 or 2050?
There you go again, talking about what should be happening. The reason I say that in somewhat in jest is that's not the way DC works. If you have think tanks devoted to inter-American dialogue come here, they will certainly talk to you about 20, 30-year integration in the region and what's needed. But the reality is when you are sitting, just put yourself in the shoes of the foreign policymakers of the current administration, be they in the State Department or the White House. You have a limited bandwidth of attention. What are you focusing on right now? You're focusing on missiles being lobbed in the Middle East and trying to prevent that from becoming a global catastrophe. You're focusing on Russia, Ukraine, and the reality that there is no more money coming to help the Ukrainians next year, and that's going to embolden Putin. What will the repercussions of that be? You're focusing on China's economy that is in serious danger of not collapse, but significant slowdown, and it's influencing the behavior of Chinese policymakers about the amount of risk they want to take in its confrontation with the U.S. You don't have bandwidth to think about, forget about 30 years down the line within Mexico, even with USMCA, nobody has started thinking about, really, in government, about the next iteration of USMCA. And I'll tell you something else. In Washington, D.C., in 2025, the renegotiation of USMCA is not going to be the biggest driver of the halls of Congress. They're going to be focused on extending the tax cuts, on pushing back the debt ceiling. So sadly, issues like this that have huge resonance for hundreds of millions of people are going to take a back seat. So what should the policy be in the next 30 years? Governments should look on the horizon. The rise of AI is creating a whole new level of demand for energy. And the North American zone is one of those unique areas globally that combines large markets, predictable legal systems, plenty of capital to really optimize and integrate energy, ample energy production and growth with creativity and with money to be the winner in what's to come. And, again, speaking with our friends in Canada, that's how they're positioning themselves. We have many representatives from Canada here. They're focused on, hey, AI is going to take a lot of energy. We have clean energy, hydropower, you name it, and it's cheap, and we're right beside you, and we're willing to work with you to marry these two. Come put your data farms here. Come do the multi-billion-dollar investments there. That's the sort of thinking that should be happening over the next 20, 30 years. And of course, when we look at the energy policy, currently at least in Mexico, that's not the direction of travel. We see kind of continued reduction of the role of hydrocarbons that will, in a Trump administration, that's going to promote, it's going to try to downgrade some of the green energy initiatives of the Biden administration, open the door for more growth in hydrocarbons, fracking, gas. If you're sitting in Mexico, that would be a great opportunity to take advantage of that. But obviously, the political dynamic here is not going in that direction, and the window is not going to last for long.
You mentioned AI in the context of the increased energy demand, but beyond that, AI as a disruptor of jobs, of the way the economy works, of how society works, the fake news, and all the challenges that we foresee. What's your take in AI?
I keep wanting to say positive things, and you keep taking me to the negative.
You get to ask the next question.
Let me bring up one example of a positive part of AI before I answer your question, which blew my mind. We were sitting, my partner in crime and founder of Eurasia Group, Ian Bremmer, and I were sitting with the CEO, one of the largest oil companies in the Middle East. And we thought the conversation was going to be about the geopolitics of oil, Middle East, etc., and U.S. election. No, what he wanted to talk about was the evolution of AI. And he gave us examples. He said, we have all this data on drilling in the region that they're in over now 50 years. And we are, in the next year, predicting about $1 billion savings in cost using AI, training these AI models on the data we have. And it's helping us be able to drill much more efficiently, be able to use far less pressure to get oil and gas out, all sorts of benefits this year. It's coming from that technology. So there's just so many examples of all the positive sides. So when after this somebody complains that he only said negative things, remember that. But yeah, AI is not by itself inherently negative, but sadly it's a tool that will turbocharge a lot of the negative dynamics that are already happening in the world. So for instance, over the last 20 years, several trends have led to this polarization in the advanced economies. We can touch on many of the reasons why, but one of them is that people have stopped getting their news from the same sources. They each now increasingly using the internet go to places which confirm their own prior biases. So if you look, as we do, after a presidential debate in the US, and afterwards you go and listen to Fox News in the US versus CNN, it's as if they watch two different ecosystems. And if you, as a informed, educated electorate, only get your news from those places, what you come out of this makes you reach conclusions that are quite different. AI, the capabilities with AI, is just going to democratize the ability to create the facts you want much more efficiently and much more effectively. So in the motion feature industry, it's going to be great because, as we were just told, people want to be entertained, and it's going to make it a lot easier to do. In the news consumption and informed electorate part of the equation, it's going to be a hugely negative development, not just by bad actors, not just by elections. We're already seeing in the Middle East, in Asia, governments, non-government agencies are creating their own AI-generated audio and visual products to try to push their own narratives. And people, it's harder and harder for people to figure that out. And that's only one of the negative externalities. You have the proliferation of the ability to create hugely destructive tools. 20 years ago, there were maybe the number of people that could create a dirty bomb would be measured in hundreds, maybe 1,000. But now with AI tools, if there's a will, that ability is going to be democratized to tens and hundreds of thousands of people. And with the rise of non-state actors, the risks are going to be exponentially growing. Now, can it be regulated and governed? It's an area actually we've been quite active in. At many countries in the world, they're starting to get their hands around the problem. The UN has started an intergovernmental panel, kind of like what they did for climate, where they brought scientists together to have a common set of truths about the science of climate around AI. So the beginnings of this are happening, but at the end of the day, this technology is evolving so rapidly, there is no government regulator that can keep up. So private sector has to be part of the solution. And of course, governments, while they want to regulate it, they also don't want to be left behind. So you have the Chinese government, governments in Arab countries of the Persian Gulf, in Southeast Asia, India. They are also wanting to be close to the cutting edge of using this technology for national security reasons, for defending their secrets, for breaking other people's secrets, for creating more effective military. So some level of regulation goes against that desire. So it's going to be a much more complicated world.
Thank you. Many universities, at least at Tec de Monterrey, we like to say that we're in the business of hope. So what gives you hope?
There are, in the middle of all this, there are lots of things that are going right. Obviously, the turn towards all of these polite new terms for protectionism, nearshoring, friendshoring, supply chain security, these all sound really nice, but it's really different words for protectionism. That's going to mean that the world we will have in the future is not going to be, the pie is not going to be bigger. And the best way to bring people out of poverty is to grow the pie. As we saw in the last 30 years, we saw the largest rise of humanity out of poverty during the heyday of globalization. We are moving to a world where that's not even an aspiration, and it's going to be increasingly fragmented. I think if there is a ray of hope is there is room and scope for us to not go to deglobalization, but to go to fragmented globalization. So within different economic zones, still deepen the integration and gain some of the benefits that could come from that. And then there are countries and sectors in the world that are really well positioned. If you are sitting in India, this is a great next 20 years for you. First of all, they're on the right side of the demographic trend. They're going to have a massive number of increase in their labor force. They have a growing market and large potential, kind of similar to what China had 30 years ago, that's going to attract foreign capital. From a security perspective, they are more aligned with the West, and that's why they're part of this new security group called the Quad, US, India, Japan, and Australia, which is going to broaden it further. And because of that large market and because of India's ability in the future to be a counterpoint to China in this polarizing world, India is going to have a lot of leverage to be able to welcome technology from the West, and it's using it strategically. They are wanting to grow an EV industry in India. They have They want to create several different clusters, some of them obviously local. They have kept out the Chinese and welcomed Tesla. And the policymaking is trying to take advantage of the position they're in. If you look at Europe, there's not a lot of great things to say about Europe. Its population is declining. There's very little growth there. But the silver lining of Putin's attack to Ukraine was we saw a solidarity in the way that the European countries and NATO came together right on the back of the effective way that Europe was able to combat COVID together. Those were very positive signposts for many Europeans who were questioning, why did we integrate? It would be better going back to nation states. I think that the unity of that region has strengthened beyond what we had expected. So there's many more stories like this we can tell within an overall dynamic that sadly is only going to get worse.
Maziar, thank you very much for being here. Thank you for your ideas and insights, and looking forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you.